What if the fairy tale we were sold was built on a secret that could shatter the very foundation of the royal family? Imagine for a moment that the carefully curated image of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the modern couple, the global icons, the doting parents, was hiding a truth so explosive that it could change the way the world views them forever. That's exactly where this story begins, and it's a story unlike anything we've ever seen before. Because now, Meghan herself has admitted something unthinkable. Archie's biological father is not Prince Harry. Instead, she revealed in a shocking confession that Archie was fathered by someone who was never meant to step into the spotlight, a man tasked with protecting her, shielding her, guarding her from the world. A royal bodyguard. And just like that, every smile, every photo op, every interview takes on a whole new meaning. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Can you even imagine Harry's devastation? The betrayal? The sheer disbelief? For years, the question of Harry's choices and Meghan's influence has divided the public, but no one could have predicted this. Because if Meghan's confession is true, then the line of succession itself has been thrown into chaos. Let's pause here. Ask yourself this. If the very institution that defines itself by bloodlines, duty, and heritage suddenly discovered that one of its most celebrated children was not who the world believed him to be, how could it survive the scandal? This isn't just a personal tragedy. It's a constitutional crisis. It's a betrayal that hits at the very heart of monarchy. Now let's rewind. To truly understand how this all came to light, you need to see the cracks that were forming behind the palace walls long before Meghan spoke the truth. In the beginning, Harry and Meghan's story was painted like a fairy tale. The charming prince, the beautiful American actress. The world fell in love with their romance. The royal wedding was watched by millions across the globe. The symbolism of a new, modern monarchy was celebrated everywhere. But the reality, as we now know, was far darker than the glossy photographs and staged appearances suggested. Behind closed doors, Meghan often found herself isolated. Harry was frequently away, official tours, military commitments, endless royal duties. She was left alone in palaces that were not homes, but gilded cages. Think about it. An outsider in one of the most traditional institutions in the world, with very few people she could trust. And in those quiet moments of loneliness, she turned to the one person who was always there, her royal protection officer. This wasn't just any staff member. Bodyguards live in the shadows of those they protect. They hear everything. They see everything. They're there in moments of vulnerability, in tears, in laughter, in silence. They become confidants in ways the public rarely understands. So, when Meghan says she felt lonely and misunderstood, is it really so surprising that she grew close to someone who was always by her side? But here's the contradiction that stuns the world. While Meghan has built her brand on empowerment, independence, and control, this revelation paints her as someone who sought refuge outside of her marriage in ways that devastate her public image. Isn't it ironic? The woman who claimed she was silenced now becomes the one whose truth may silence Harry forever. And then came Archie, the baby who was supposed to bring healing. The child celebrated as the next chapter of royal history. When Meghan and Harry presented him to the world, smiling proudly, it was a symbol of hope. But whispers began almost immediately. Did Archie really look like Harry? Were the features aligning? Small murmurs in tabloids were brushed off as cruel speculation. Loyal fans shut down such questions. But somewhere, deep inside the palace, the unease grew. Imagine Harry's position. A man defined by the trauma of his mother's betrayal and the constant media scrutiny of his own life. A man who swore to protect his wife and his children from the very same circus that haunted him. And now, to learn that his wife had been carrying a truth that would tear apart his world. It was a nightmare repeating itself in ways he could never have imagined. But the real turning point, the point of no return, came with the DNA results. Science doesn't lie. When Meghan finally confessed, when the evidence was undeniable, Harry's entire reality collapsed. Can you picture the scene? The paper in his hands. The quiet moment before the storm. That heartbeat of disbelief, followed by a surge of rage, grief, and humiliation. Every laugh, every cuddle, every late-night talk about fatherhood suddenly poisoned by the thought, Archie isn't mine. The palace knew immediately this was not a story that could be contained forever. Not in the digital age. Not when leaks, whispers, and half-truths spread faster than wildfire. And so, what was supposed to remain private became the scandal of the century. But let's ask the most important question here. What does this mean for Harry? He gave up his titles, his homeland, his family traditions for Meghan. He turned his back on the institution he once served to start a new life in America. And yet, the very foundation of that new life, his marriage, his child, his identity as a father, now stands on shaky ground. Would you stay? Would you fight to hold on to a life that was built on deception? Or would you walk away, say goodbye, and try to rebuild what little of yourself remains? That's the decision Harry now faces. It's not just about Meghan. It's not just about Archie. It's about who he is when the world looks at him not as a prince, not as a husband, not even as a father, but as a man who was betrayed. And yet, this is only the beginning. Because if you think Meghan's confession was shocking, just wait until you see how the palace reacted, how the media exploded, and how Harry himself chose to respond. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Loneliness can destroy even the strongest bonds. And behind the grand walls of palaces, isolation isn't just silence, it's suffocating. That's where Meghan Markle's story begins to shift from fairy tale romance to something darker, something forbidden. Because while the world watched her wave to cheering crowds and pose for dazzling photographs, something else was happening behind the scenes. Something that would eventually turn whispers into the loudest scandal the monarchy has ever faced. Let's ask a question right away. How does a woman who married a prince, who seemingly had it all, find herself confiding in a man who was supposed to be invisible? The answer lies in the life no one talks about. The life of a royal spouse when the cameras switch off. From the very start, Meghan's adjustment was brutal. She wasn't just stepping into a new family. She was stepping into centuries of protocol, scrutiny, and unspoken rules. And unlike most new brides, she didn't just have in-laws to impress. She had the world. Every gesture was analyzed. Every expression dissected. Every word she spoke weighed against tradition. That pressure, compounded by Harry's constant duties and frequent absences, left Meghan in an emotional vacuum. Now imagine this. You're in a gilded palace. Everything looks perfect, yet you feel completely alone. Your husband is away. The courtiers don't trust you. The press hounds you. And your phone calls back home can't fill the void. And then, there's one person always there. Always watching. Always ready to step in when things get too heavy. Not a friend. Not a family member. A bodyguard. Bodyguards live in the shadows. They're trained to anticipate danger before it happens. They read every flicker of body language. They protect without hesitation. But in doing so, they often see more than anyone else. They see fear. They see sadness. They see loneliness. And in Meghan's case, that bodyguard became something more. He was, as palace insiders have quietly hinted, her anchor. When she cried, he was there. When she felt unsafe, he reassured her. When she needed to escape suffocating protocol, he was the one who opened the door. And over time, a bond formed, one deeper than she could admit to Harry, and one she tried desperately to deny to herself. But here's the contradiction that gnaws at the edges of this story. Meghan was presented to the world as strong, independent, fearless. She stood on global stages, spoke about empowerment, and carried herself as someone untouchable. Yet behind closed doors, she leaned on a man whose entire job was to stay silent. Doesn't that irony cut deep? The woman who told us she didn't need rescuing found herself rescued emotionally, but at a devastating cost. So when Meghan says, Harry was traveling a lot. I was lonely. It's not an excuse. It's a confession. It's the soft underbelly of her life as a duchess, the side no PR team could spin. Think about Harry here for a second. While he was dedicating himself to causes, trying to prove he could balance royal duty with being a husband and father, the very foundation of his marriage was shifting under his feet. He trusted that Meghan was waiting for him. Instead, her loneliness was drawing her closer to someone who wasn't him. Isn't that the cruelest twist of fate? And this wasn't some glamorous Hollywood fling. No red carpets. No candlelit dinners in Paris. It was something far more dangerous, stolen moments. A glance held too long in the hallway. A conversation that lingered after the job was done. Late-night talks under the guise of security. The kind of slow burn that doesn't explode all at once, but smolders until one day the line is crossed. It happened quietly, secretly. Meghan and the bodyguard's closeness turned into something no one could undo. And though she might have tried to bury it, to pretend it was nothing more than a fleeting mistake, the truth was that moment of intimacy would echo for years. But what makes this story even more haunting is how invisible it all was to Harry. The very man tasked with protecting his wife was, unknowingly, the one stealing pieces of her heart. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Imagine Harry's face, if he had known then, watching the man he trusted with his wife's safety becoming her confidant. Would he have recognized the signs? Or was he too blinded by love to even consider the possibility? This is where the seeds of scandal were planted. A prince distracted by duty, a duchess consumed by loneliness, and a protector who crossed the line from shield to secret lover. Now let's pause. Put yourself in Meghan's shoes. If you were cut off from your family, targeted by the press, watched by courtiers who whispered behind your back, and one man offered comfort, protection, and understanding, would you resist? Or would you give in to the very human need to be seen, to be wanted, to be held? It's easy to judge from the outside, but the deeper you go, the harder it is to ignore the emotional storm that was brewing. Meghan's choice wasn't just betrayal. It was survival. At least, that's what she tells herself. And yet, survival has consequences. Because from the moment that line was crossed, the royal fairy tale was doomed. What was supposed to be a marriage built on love and unity now carried the weight of a secret that could crush it at any time. The irony? For years, Meghan spoke about being unprotected, about how the palace failed her. And now the world learns that the one who protected her may have given her something the palace never could, but at the cost of her marriage and Harry's trust. And that's where the first chapter of this scandal leaves us. With Meghan caught in a quiet storm of her own making, Harry blissfully unaware, and a palace that thought it was secure, while under its own roof, history's most dangerous secret was already unfolding. But if you think that's where the story ends, think again. Because what began as whispers of closeness was about to become something far more undeniable. Something no one in Buckingham Palace could ever prepare for. Because the night everything changed was just around the corner, and from that moment, there would be no turning back. There's always a moment where everything changes. A line crossed, a point of no return. For Meghan Markle and the man who was supposed to protect her, that moment didn't come with flashing lights or dramatic music. It came quietly, in the stillness of a night no one could have predicted. And from that instant on, everything about their lives, and Harry's, would be different. Here's the question. How does a bond forged in silence, in fleeting glances and whispered words, tip into something forbidden? The answer is both simple and devastating. Because while love is often loud and public, betrayal is born in secrecy. Harry was away. That's where this part of the story begins. Duty called him, as it always did. Royal tours, public engagements, causes that demanded his presence. Meghan, left behind, wore the smile the cameras demanded. But when the photographers left, when the corridors grew quiet, she was alone again. The weight of that isolation pressed harder with each passing day. And then there was him, the bodyguard, always present, never obtrusive. His footsteps matched hers. His eyes scanned the crowd before hers. His voice, calm and reassuring, steadied her when the press surged too close. That night, though, the roles shifted. He wasn't just the guard anymore. He became the confidant, the listener, the man who saw her not as a duchess or a symbol, but as a woman. Imagine the scene. The palace halls darkened, the day's duties over. Meghan, restless, unable to sleep. The guard, stationed nearby, performing his duty. A conversation sparks, casual at first, harmless. But words stretch longer, linger heavier. Meghan confides her frustrations, her loneliness, her doubts. He listens, genuinely listens, something she feels Harry hasn't had time to do. And then it happens, the brush of a hand, a glance held too long, an unspoken electricity that fills the silence. In that moment, choice dissolved into impulse. The boundaries of duty blurred into desire. And Meghan, who once vowed before the world to stand by her prince, stepped into a shadow she could never escape. Now pause here. Ask yourself, was it love? Or was it desperation? Was it passion? Or was it the crushing loneliness finally breaking through? The truth is, it doesn't matter. Because for Harry, the result is the same. Betrayal. But Meghan, in that night, wasn't thinking of Harry. She was thinking of relief, of being seen, of feeling human again. While Harry carried the weight of the monarchy, Meghan carried the weight of her silence. And for one reckless night, she dropped it. The irony cuts sharp, doesn't it? The man sworn to protect the royal marriage was the very one who dismantled it. The guard, whose duty was loyalty, became the symbol of betrayal. And here's the twist. It wasn't a grand affair filled with luxury and indulgence. No hotel suites. No trips abroad. Just two people who crossed a line in the dimly lit rooms of a palace meant to preserve tradition. Isn't that the cruelest irony of all? That the monarchy's fortress became the very stage for its undoing? From that night on, Meghan carried a secret no crown, no title, no palace wall could contain. She told herself it was a mistake. She swore it wouldn't happen again. She convinced herself she could bury it, that Harry would never know. But secrets, especially royal ones, don't stay hidden. Not forever. And so began the greatest contradiction in Meghan's life. She smiled on balconies. She waved at crowds. She kissed Harry in public and called him her soulmate. Yet in the quiet recesses of her mind, she carried the memory of a night that didn't belong to him. Now think of the bodyguard. A man trained to be invisible suddenly entangled in a secret bigger than anything he had sworn to guard against. Did he regret it? Did he fear the consequences? Or did he feel something deeper, knowing he was tied forever to the Duchess he was paid to protect? We may never know, but one thing is clear. His life, like Meghan's, was never the same again. And this is where the danger truly began. Because passion fades, but consequences grow. Meghan didn't know then that her actions would echo in the face of the monarchy for years to come. She didn't know then that DNA tests, headlines, and shattered vows would one day follow. She only knew the temporary comfort of a night she could never admit to Harry. Here's where the real cliffhanger builds. When Archie was born, every eye in the world turned to him. They saw a royal baby, a symbol of hope. But Meghan saw something more, a question that would haunt her. A question of resemblance. A question of blood. A question she prayed would never come to light. Because that night of passion, that single step across the line of loyalty, wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It became a secret written into the very DNA of the royal family. And if you think Meghan's guilty conscience was heavy then, wait until you see how the birth of Archie turned suspicion into whispers, and whispers into undeniable truth. Because what came next wasn't just whispers in the palace halls. It was the arrival of a child who carried the weight of two fathers, one of love and one of blood. And no amount of royal protocol could prepare them for the fallout that was about to begin. The birth of a royal child is supposed to be a moment of pure celebration. A unifying event that reminds the world of the monarchy's continuity, tradition, and promise of the future. But when Archie was born, beneath the smiles and cheers, there was already a shadow creeping in. A shadow that only grew darker as the whispers began. The cameras captured the perfect image. Harry, glowing with pride, cradling his newborn son. Meghan, exhausted but radiant, smiling at the flashes that documented history. The headlines declared joy. The Sussexes welcome baby boy, the modern face of the royal family. Around the world, congratulations poured in. But behind the polished photographs and carefully rehearsed statements, something didn't feel quite right. Let's ask ourselves, why? In the middle of such joy, did suspicion already stir? Why did palace insiders whisper about questions they didn't dare put on record? And why did Meghan herself, despite her beaming smile, seem to hold Archie just a little tighter, as if guarding him from more than just the cameras? The answer is simple and yet devastating. Because by the time Archie arrived, Meghan already knew what Harry didn't. She knew that the joy she was showing the world was tangled with guilt, and that every passing day brought her closer to a reckoning. But let's rewind to the day of Archie's introduction. The world expected a picture-perfect debut on the steps of the hospital, in line with royal tradition. That didn't happen. Instead, Meghan and Harry broke with protocol, keeping the press at bay and introducing Archie in a private, tightly controlled setting. At the time, the couple insisted it was about privacy, about doing things differently, about being modern parents. But was it really just privacy, or was it fear? Fear that close-up photos might spark comparisons. Fear that curious eyes might notice something Harry was too blinded by love to see. And soon enough, whispers did start. Ordinary people noticed details in photographs. The tabloids hinted at unusual features. Online forums exploded with speculation. Did Archie look like Harry? Or did his features tell a different story? Now, let's be very clear. Babies change, faces shift, and resemblance is a dangerous game. But in the royal family, resemblance isn't just vanity, it's identity. It's legitimacy. It's the entire foundation of succession. And in Archie's case, every doubt cut deeper than the last. Harry, of course, dismissed it all. He was thrilled to finally be a father, something he had dreamed of since the shadow of his own childhood tragedies. He doted on Archie, kissed his head, called him his little mini-me. For Harry, Archie was more than a baby. He was redemption. Proof that he could give his child what Diana couldn't give him, a safe, loving home. But for Meghan, that joy was poisoned by knowledge. Imagine holding your newborn son and smiling for the cameras, all while a secret screams inside you. Imagine looking at your husband, who believes wholeheartedly this is his son, and knowing the truth that could break him. The contradiction was unbearable. And the palace? They noticed too. Palace aides, staff, courtiers, the people who see what the cameras don't, began to talk in hushed voices. Something doesn't add up. Do you notice? No, don't say it aloud. Rumors are nothing new in royal circles, but these weren't just idle speculations. These were whispers rooted in real unease. But here's the emotional dagger. Meghan couldn't stop the world from noticing. The harder she tried to present the perfect image, the louder the doubts became. And every doubt was a ticking time bomb. Because eventually, someone would ask the one question she dreaded most. Is Harry really the father? Now, think of Harry again. He wasn't just oblivious, he was proud. He had walked away from parts of his family for Meghan, defended her against tabloids, shielded her from criticism. And now, his reward, in his eyes, was this beautiful child. But in Meghan's heart, every time Harry called Archie, our son, she felt the sting of guilt. Let's pause and ask the audience directly. Would you have told the truth? Would you have shattered your partner's happiness in the name of honesty? Or would you have hidden it, praying the truth would never come to light? Meghan chose the latter. And in doing so, she set the stage for the most explosive revelation in royal history. Because soon enough, it wasn't just public whispers. It wasn't just gossip columns. It was insiders demanding answers. And eventually, suspicion turned into action. DNA testing, quietly ordered, secretly carried out. A test that Meghan hoped would never happen. But once it did, there would be no turning back. This is where Archie's birth transforms from joy into tragedy. Because for Harry, what should have been the happiest chapter of his life was about to become the cruelest betrayal. The child he loved with all his heart, the child he claimed as his legacy, was about to be revealed as someone else's. And that truth, sealed in a single test result, would break him in ways the world had never seen. Because what came next wasn't just a whisper, or even a rumor. It was undeniable science. And once Harry opened that envelope, everything changed, forever. Secrets can be buried for a time, but the truth has a way of clawing its way out. And in the royal family, where everything is documented, analyzed, and scrutinized, a secret as explosive as this was never going to remain hidden forever. That's where the DNA test enters this story, the cold, scientific moment that ripped away illusion and left nothing but raw, undeniable reality. Let's start with the obvious question. Why would anyone order such a test in the first place? On the surface, it sounds absurd. Why would the son of Princess Diana, a man adored by millions, ever doubt his own child? But the answer isn't about Harry. It's about everyone else. From the very beginning, whispers surrounded Archie's birth. In staff corridors, in media circles, in quiet palace meetings, the same hushed question kept resurfacing. Does he really look like Harry? A dangerous question. A question that attacked the very foundation of royal identity. And as those whispers grew louder, palace insiders knew they couldn't rely on appearances alone. They needed certainty. Sources suggest it wasn't Harry who first requested the test. It was the institution. Senior advisors, perhaps even royals themselves, pressed for clarity. Not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Because if Archie wasn't Harry's biological son, the monarchy faced a crisis unlike any it had seen before. Questions of succession. Questions of legitimacy. Questions that could rock the crown itself. Meghan, of course, resisted. She knew what the test would reveal. She knew the cost of her truth. But in a system as controlling and paranoid as the monarchy, her resistance was futile. The order came down quietly, discreetly. No announcements. No fanfare. Just a simple request for a sample. Hair. Blood. A swab. Small things that held the power to change history. And then, the waiting began. Imagine the tension. A test that should have been clinical became the most emotionally charged moment of Harry's life. He didn't want it, not really. He believed Archie was his son. He needed to believe it. To question that was to question everything he had fought for, everything he had built with Meghan. But once the test was in motion, even Harry couldn't stop it. And when the results came back, there was no room for denial. Science is merciless. The test confirmed what Meghan had feared. Harry was not Archie's biological father. The truth was etched into the very strands of DNA, unchangeable, undeniable. Now pause for a moment. Imagine being Harry, holding that envelope in your hands, knowing it contains either relief or devastation. Your heart pounding, your breath shallow, the paper tearing as you open it, the words in front of you blurring as the reality crashes down. The child you love, the child you thought was your legacy, is not yours. Think of the storm of emotions: rage, grief, humiliation, disbelief. Did he scream? Did he cry? Did he collapse in silence? We may never know, but one thing is certain. In that moment, Harry's world collapsed. And Meghan? She had no choice but to confess. She could no longer hide behind smiles, behind carefully crafted statements, behind controlled appearances. The secret was out, and the walls of the palace echoed with its weight. Harry was traveling a lot. I was lonely. Simple words. But behind them lay the betrayal of a lifetime. The irony is brutal, isn't it? A bodyguard sworn to protect the prince ended up fathering the child who shook the monarchy. The man meant to shield the family instead rewrote its story. Protected the duchess, fathered her child. It's the kind of twist no novelist could invent. Yet here it was, etched in blood. For the palace, the results were a nightmare. Damage control went into overdrive. Who would know? Who could they trust? Could this be buried forever? But the problem with truth is that it rarely stays locked away. All it takes is one leak, one insider whispering to the wrong ear, and the scandal is unleashed. But before the world even learned, Harry faced the most personal devastation of all. He had to look at Meghan, the woman he gave up his life for, the woman he defended against his family, the woman he loved beyond reason, and see her not as his partner, but as his betrayer. Let's ask the audience directly. What would you have done in his place? Would you have forgiven? Would you have raged? Would you have walked away, or clung on for the sake of the child you had raised as your own? There are no easy answers. But Harry's reaction, according to those who witnessed it, was clear. Heartbreak so deep it could never be undone. And that's where the story sharpens into its cruelest edge. Because Archie, innocent in all of this, became the silent casualty of adult choices. For Harry, every hug, every bedtime story, every smile was now laced with pain. For Meghan, every moment of joy was tainted by guilt. And for the monarchy, every picture of Archie was a reminder of the scandal they could not contain. This chapter doesn't end with closure. It ends with Harry walking out of the room where the truth was laid bare, leaving behind a silence so heavy it spoke louder than any words. But if you think the DNA results were the peak of the scandal, you're mistaken. Because the next wave wasn't about science. It was about emotion, rage, betrayal, revenge. And Harry, The boy who lost his mother to betrayal now faced the betrayal of his own wife. And what he did next would shock even those closest to him. Because the truth was out, but the fallout was only just beginning. Betrayal. That's the only word strong enough to capture what Prince Harry felt when the DNA results landed like a bombshell in his hands. He had lived his entire life in the shadow of betrayal. His mother's heartbreak, the media's exploitation, the monarchy's coldness, but nothing could have prepared him for this. Nothing could have prepared him for the moment he realized the child he adored, the son he called his own, was not his by blood. Let's not sugarcoat this. Harry was shattered. Imagine it. The boy who grew up watching his mother cry in palace corridors, who swore he would do everything differently, now finding himself in the exact nightmare he thought he'd escaped. He had built his marriage with Meghan on a foundation of loyalty against the world. He had sacrificed his home, his titles, his family ties to protect her. And now, the very woman he defended was the one who had delivered the deepest cut. The scene, according to whispers from palace insiders, was devastating. Harry sat in silence at first, staring at the paper as though if he just blinked hard enough, the words would change. His hands trembled. His chest heaved. Rage swelled, but so did grief. Betrayal is never just one emotion. It's an avalanche. It's disbelief, heartbreak, fury, humiliation, all crashing down at once. And then the questions came. The agonizing, unanswerable questions. How long? Who else knew? Was anything between us ever real? Meghan, cornered by truth, gave the line that would haunt him forever. Harry was traveling a lot. I was lonely. Simple. Almost cold. A confession wrapped in justification. But what justification can ever soothe the wound of discovering your child is not your own? Think about this. For years, Harry had been mocked, ridiculed, dismissed as the spare. He fought to carve his own identity outside of William's shadow. And when he married Meghan, he believed he had finally found someone who chose him for him. She wasn't bound by monarchy. She wasn't tied to his title. She loved Harry, the man. Or so he thought. And now, standing in the ruins of his trust, he realized he had been living a lie. Let's turn the question to you, the audience. What would you have done? Would you rage at the woman who betrayed you? Would you walk out without looking back? Or would you cling to the child, innocent in all of this, even if his blood wasn't yours? Harry's reaction was a storm. Witnesses describe him pacing, fists clenched, eyes wild with disbelief. The memories of every moment, every kiss, every promise, every sleepless night with Archie, now poisoned by doubt. It's all fake, he muttered, his voice cracking. All of it. My life is fake. But here's the cruel irony. Harry still loved Archie. That bond didn't disappear with a test result. The nights he rocked Archie to sleep, the first time he held him, the joy of hearing him laugh, those moments were real. And yet, in the back of his mind, the truth screamed louder. Archie isn't mine. Love and rage battled inside him, leaving him broken, torn between his heart and the DNA that betrayed him. For Meghan, the moment was equally unbearable. She watched the man she married unravel in front of her. She saw the fury in his eyes, the tears he tried to fight back, the betrayal that cut deeper than any headline ever could. She tried to explain, to frame it as a mistake, a fleeting weakness. But to Harry, it was unforgivable. How do you explain to a man who gave up everything for you that you've destroyed the one thing he valued most? And then came the humiliation. Harry knew it wasn't just between them anymore. Others in the palace knew. Advisors had seen the results. The walls had ears. The scandal was already alive, even if the public hadn't learned yet. For a man who had always despised the tabloids, who had always feared being the subject of ridicule, the knowledge that whispers about his son's paternity were now spreading behind closed doors was unbearable. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was public. He wasn't just a man betrayed by his wife. He was a prince betrayed in a way that made him vulnerable to mockery, to ridicule, to the very media circus he had tried to escape. And the thought of being paraded as a fool in the world's headlines was almost as devastating as the betrayal itself. So what did Harry do? He walked out. Not forever, not yet. But he stormed out of the room, out of the palace, needing air, needing space. For hours, no one knew where he went. Some say he drove aimlessly through the countryside. Others whisper he sat alone in a pub, hood pulled low, drowning in silence. Wherever he was, one thing was clear. The Harry who walked back through those doors was not the same man who had walked out. Because betrayal changes you. It hardens you. It strips away innocence, trust, and hope. And for Harry, this was the final crack in a heart that had already been scarred by loss, by grief, by abandonment. He could forgive the press. He could forgive the monarchy. But could he forgive Meghan? That was the question that hung in the air, unanswered, suffocating. And yet, the worst was still to come. Because Harry's heartbreak was personal, yes, but the ripple effects were about to engulf the entire royal family. The institution that had stood for centuries was now facing a scandal that struck at its very core. And as Harry grappled with his private devastation, the palace was already preparing for the public fallout. The crisis meetings, the PR strategies, the frantic attempts to control the uncontrollable, all of it was only just beginning. Because what Harry didn't realize, as he sat drowning in betrayal, was that his personal heartbreak was about to become the monarchy's greatest nightmare. And the palace's response would set the stage for chaos no one could contain. Panic. That was the word whispered through every corridor of Buckingham Palace when the truth about Archie's paternity broke within those walls. Forget the rehearsed calm, the stiff upper lip, the centuries of protocol designed to weather storms. This was no ordinary scandal. This was a potential collapse of the monarchy's image from the inside out. And make no mistake, the palace was an absolute meltdown. Think about it. The royal family survives not on power alone, but on perception. Every smile, every wave, every christening photo is part of a carefully constructed narrative, stability, tradition, continuity. But what happens when that story is shattered by the revelation that a royal child isn't royal by blood at all? The stakes couldn't have been higher. The moment the DNA results confirmed the unthinkable, senior advisors convened in urgent crisis meetings. Curtains drawn, phones confiscated, notepads shredded after discussions. This wasn't just about family drama. It was about safeguarding the crown itself. One aide reportedly muttered, "If this gets out, it will make the Diana years look tame." And that's saying everything. Let's lay it out. The monarchy had three impossible problems on its hands. First, Harry's devastation. A broken prince is unpredictable. He could lash out, speak out, or worse, leave for good. And if Harry walked, what would that mean for public loyalty? Second, Meghan's confession. Her own words, "Harry was traveling a lot. I was lonely," already hinted at weakness. If she spoke further, the palace couldn't control the narrative. And third, the bodyguard. His silence was not guaranteed. If the tabloids discovered his identity, the monarchy would be dragged through mud darker than any in recent memory. Now imagine the frantic brainstorming in those rooms. Advisors pitching strategies. Deny, deny, deny. Spin it as gossip. Protect Archie at all costs. Some even suggested a bold approach. Keep Harry in the dark, bury the results, destroy the evidence. But it was too late. Harry knew. Meghan knew. The circle of silence had already grown too wide. The Queen's advisors were reportedly torn. Some urged for immediate containment, a swift public appearance of unity between Harry and Meghan, a staged family moment to silence speculation. Others argued for distance, fearing that attaching the crown's image too closely to Meghan's confession could cause irreparable damage. The room pulsed with tension, every option a disaster waiting to happen. And here's the irony. The very monarchy built on centuries of secrets had finally encountered one it couldn't contain. The institution could bury affairs, temper scandals, even silence whispers of illegitimate children in the past. But in the digital age, where DNA speaks louder than denial and leaks spread faster than protocol, the palace found itself cornered. Meanwhile, the staff, those invisible cogs who run the daily machine, buzzed with speculation. Footmen, press officers, assistants. Everyone knew something was wrong. They saw Harry's hollow face. They heard Meghan's muffled sobs. They noticed the sudden, sharp commands from advisors desperate to control optics. And when palace staff talk, the press listens. The British tabloids, notorious for their nose for blood, began circling like sharks. Headlines teased royal secrets and hidden truths. Social media lit up with speculation. Hashtags trended. Every photo of Archie was dissected with merciless scrutiny. Was this the beginning of the leak the palace feared? Now, let's not underestimate the brutality of the media. They didn't just question Archie's resemblance. They asked the darker question, what does this mean for the line of succession? Imagine the monarchy's horror at the thought of citizens debating whether a non-royal child had been presented as a prince. The crown thrives on loyalty, but loyalty dissolves in scandal. Harry, caught in his heartbreak, was now at the center of a larger game. Advisors begged him to stay silent, to protect the institution. But Harry wasn't thinking like a prince anymore. He was thinking like a man betrayed. Every demand to protect the crown sounded to him like an insult, another betrayal on top of Meghan's. His response, reportedly furious, protect the truth, not the lies. That one sentence sent chills through those rooms. Because if Harry spoke publicly, if he let slip the truth about Archie's paternity, the monarchy couldn't stop him. No amount of spin could survive the words of Diana's son. So what did the palace do? They scrambled. They prepared emergency statements. They rehearsed press releases. They drew up contingency plans for every possible headline. If Harry walks out, if Meghan speaks out, if the bodyguard talks, these files, whispered to exist in palace archives, were said to be thicker than the very protocols of royal weddings. And yet, amid the frenzy, no one asked the simplest question, what about Archie? In the chaos of protecting an institution, the humanity of a child was forgotten. To the palace, Archie wasn't a baby. He was a liability, a ticking time bomb in a crib. Isn't that the cruelest irony of all? By the end of those first frantic days, one thing was clear. This scandal couldn't be stopped. It could only be managed. And the palace, for all its centuries of practice, was facing a truth it had never rehearsed for, that sometimes, even crowns can't hide the cracks in their foundations. And just when they thought they could control the damage, the next blow came from the one person they feared most. Not Harry, not Meghan, but the man at the very center of the storm. The bodyguard. Because once his name surfaced, once his identity was whispered beyond those palace walls, the crisis turned into a wildfire. And the monarchy's worst nightmare came true. The man meant to protect the royals was now exposed as the father of their greatest scandal. Every scandal has a face. And in this one, the palace's deepest fear was realized the moment the bodyguard's identity leaked. Up until then, it had been whispers, speculation, anonymous claims buried in corridors and secret meetings. But once a name, a face, a man was connected to Meghan's confession, the story transformed. It wasn't just rumor anymore. It was flesh and blood. The bodyguard was unmasked. Think about the shockwaves. This wasn't a politician or a Hollywood star. This was a man whose very purpose was to remain invisible. Royal protection officers are trained to fade into the background, to guard with loyalty, to never become the story. And yet, here he was, catapulted into the spotlight as the alleged father of Archie, the royal baby the world had celebrated. The irony was almost unbearable. Let's paint the picture. He wasn't a glamorous figure. No aristocratic lineage. No fame. Just a professional, fit, discreet, with a reputation for dedication. His colleagues had once described him as the shadow who never speaks. And now that shadow had a voice, whether he wanted it or not. Headlines screamed, royal bodyguard, protector or father? Photos that once showed him in the background of Meghan's outings were dragged into the front pages, circled, analyzed, torn apart. The man who had once been invisible was now the most visible symbol of betrayal. And here's the contradiction that stunned the public. He was respected. People who knew him said he was loyal, reliable, professional to the core. But if the claims were true, then loyalty had its limits. The very protector had crossed the ultimate line. Doesn't that cut to the bone? The one who shielded the family physically had pierced it emotionally. For Meghan, his unmasking was devastating. What had been her hidden comfort, her private mistake, was now a face plastered across tabloids. Every time she saw his photo, every headline naming him, it was a reminder of the secret that destroyed her marriage. The affair wasn't abstract anymore. It was a man with a name, a man the public could point at. And with that came humiliation not just for Meghan, but for Harry. Imagine Harry's rage when the man he once trusted with Meghan's safety was now revealed as the father of her child. The betrayal wasn't just intimate. It was professional, personal, and public. How many times had Harry walked beside him, shaken his hand, thanked him for his service? How many times had he looked this man in the eye, not knowing the truth that was festering behind it? And the public? They were torn. Some saw Meghan as a woman trapped, seeking solace in loneliness. Others saw her as a manipulator who had destroyed a prince's trust. But when the bodyguard's identity became part of the story, the narrative shifted. It wasn't just about Meghan anymore. It was about the monarchy's vulnerability. If someone within their own trusted circle could breach loyalty this way, what did it say about the system? About the walls meant to protect the crown? Now let's dig into the cruelest irony of all, Archie. With the bodyguard's face out in the world, people began to compare. Side-by-side photos circulated online. Commentators asked, "Do you see the resemblance?" The speculation became brutal. Every feature of the child was dissected in public view. His hair, his nose, his smile. And though Archie was innocent, he was reduced to evidence in the court of public opinion. Isn't that the most tragic part? That a child was now being judged by the sins of adults? The palace, of course, went into overdrive. They issued warnings to the press. They tried to shut down stories. They even threatened legal action against anyone publishing certain photos. But the harder they tried to silence it, the louder it became. Because in today's world, secrets don't stay buried. The unmasking had unleashed a wildfire that no palace decree could contain. And then came the silence from the man himself. The bodyguard didn't speak publicly, at least not immediately. But that silence was almost louder than words. The public read it as guilt. The press framed it as proof. If he had nothing to hide, wouldn't he deny it? But his refusal to step forward only fueled speculation. Was it discretion? Or was it fear of the consequences? Harry's humiliation deepened. Not only had he been betrayed, but now the world had a face to attach to that betrayal. The memes, the commentary, the late-night jokes, all of it turned him into a spectacle. The spare, who had finally carved out his own life, now looked, in the eyes of many, like a fool. And the monarchy? They feared what this meant for their very survival. If the institution couldn't even keep its inner circle loyal, what did that say about the strength of the crown itself? Now let me ask you, do you think the palace should have hidden the bodyguard's identity at all costs? Should they have taken extreme measures to bury his name forever? Or was it inevitable that the truth would surface, no matter how hard they tried? The reality is this. Once the bodyguard was unmasked, the scandal was no longer a secret to be contained. It was a global story with faces, names, and undeniable consequences. And as the frenzy grew, the media's claws sank deeper. Because what came next wasn't just about whispers in palaces or photos in tabloids. It was a full-scale media frenzy, a storm that would engulf not just Meghan and Harry, but the entire royal family in chaos the likes of which they had never seen before. The palace had feared it. Meghan had dreaded it. Harry had prayed it would never come to pass. But once the bodyguard was unmasked, the story escaped their control entirely. The British press smelled blood, and when the media turns a whisper into a headline, the world doesn't just listen, it roars. What came next was nothing short of a frenzy. Imagine it. Within hours of the leak, every front page was plastered with bold, screaming words: Royal Bodyguard Bombshell. Protector or father? Archie's bloodline in question. The photographs that had once shown the bodyguard in the background, sunglasses on, expression calm, walking just a few steps behind Meghan, were now cropped, magnified, and splashed across tabloids worldwide. No longer a shadow. He was now the centerpiece of a scandal threatening the monarchy itself. But it didn't stop at newspapers. The 24-hour news cycle devoured the story. Panels of royal experts dissected every detail. Look at Archie's chin, one commentator said. That's not Harry's jawline. Social media erupted in memes, side-by-side comparisons, and hashtags that trended within minutes. Hashtag Royal Bodyguard Dad. Hashtag Archie Truth. Hashtag Harry Betrayed. Millions chimed in, each tweet fueling the storm, each post making the story inescapable. And then came the cruelest cut of all, late-night comedians. They joked about Harry being the only man in Britain who needed protection from his own protector. They laughed at the idea of the palace hiring bodyguards not just to defend, but to impregnate. For Harry, already humiliated in private, these public taunts were salt in an open wound. But let's pause here. Think about the impact on Archie. A child, innocent and unaware, reduced to a global talking point. His photos scrutinized, his features debated, his very existence questioned. Isn't that heartbreaking? A little boy dragged into a firestorm before he could even understand what it meant. The sins of adults became his burden, carried on headlines he didn't ask for. Meanwhile, Meghan found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. Every interview she had ever given was replayed, dissected for hidden meanings. Every time she spoke about motherhood, critics now saw deceit. She lied to the world, commentators said. She lied to Harry. Her carefully crafted image, the strong, independent Duchess, the advocate, the survivor, was collapsing under the weight of her confession. And yet, Meghan's defenders emerged too. Some voices argued she was a victim, isolated, unsupported, driven into the arms of the one person who was always by her side. Can you blame her? One op-ed asked. Loneliness destroys even the strongest. But for every sympathetic voice, there were 10 others calling her manipulative, selfish, even dangerous. The polarization was vicious. Harry, of course, was silent. And in that silence, the press went wild. Every absence was interpreted as rage. Every sighting of him with a grim face became proof of his devastation. Was he leaving Meghan? Was he demanding custody? Was he about to speak publicly? The speculation never ended. And the longer Harry said nothing, the louder the frenzy grew. The palace tried desperately to intervene. Statements were drafted, rehearsed, then torn up. How could they protect the monarchy's image without exposing themselves further? If they denied, would it fuel suspicion? If they stayed silent, would silence be seen as admission? It was a trap with no escape. And that's when the leaks began. Anonymous sources fed tabloids inside details. Meghan's confession, Harry's reaction, even whispers of arguments behind palace doors. Whether true or exaggerated, it didn't matter. The media devoured every word. Harry walked out. Meghan sobbed uncontrollably. The Queen is furious. Each headline drove the frenzy higher. But here's the most brutal irony. While the palace scrambled to contain the fire, the media had no interest in resolution. Scandal sells. Chaos keeps viewers glued. And so every time the story seemed to quiet, it was reignited with a new twist, a new photo, a new angle. The frenzy wasn't just coverage, it was fuel. For the monarchy, this was catastrophic. The institution thrives on control, on projecting calm and continuity. And now, that illusion was shattered. The public no longer saw stability. They saw betrayal. They saw dysfunction. They saw a royal family crumbling under secrets. Polls began to shift. Support for the monarchy wavered. And the question many had once whispered became louder. Why do we still need them? Let's ask the audience here. If you were in Harry's shoes, what would you have done? Would you step forward and tell your truth, even if it meant destroying the institution your family had guarded for centuries? Or would you protect the monarchy, even if it meant burying your own heartbreak? Harry's choice wasn't clear yet. But one thing was undeniable. The frenzy had changed him. No longer just the prince who had walked away for love. He was now the betrayed man trapped between silence and explosion. And just when the media storm seemed unbearable, Harry made his most devastating move yet. He said goodbye, because the next chapter wasn't about tabloids or advisors. It was about a man, broken by betrayal, finally walking away from the life he had sacrificed everything to build. And his goodbye would echo louder than any headline. Goodbyes are never clean. They're jagged. They're soaked in heartbreak, in words unsaid, in tears you don't want anyone to see. And when Prince Harry finally reached his breaking point, the world didn't see a prince leaving his wife. They saw a man who had lost everything he thought he knew. This wasn't the polished Harry we'd watched at weddings, smiling for cameras. This was the raw Harry, betrayed, humiliated, torn apart, saying goodbye. The decision didn't happen in an instant. It built up like pressure in a volcano, each betrayal, each revelation, each headline pushing him closer to eruption. The DNA test was the spark. The unmasking of the bodyguard poured gasoline on the fire. And the media frenzy? That was the explosion. By the time the storm reached full force, Harry was a man drowning. He had two options: sink with Meghan or save what little of himself was left. Imagine the scene. Harry, pacing the living room late at night. The curtains drawn, the house silent except for the sound of his own footsteps. Meghan sitting across the room, her face streaked with tears, begging him to understand, to forgive. But every word out of her mouth felt like a knife. Harry, it didn't mean anything, she pleaded. But how do you tell a man that the fatherhood he had cherished, the child he had claimed as his legacy, was nothing more than an accident born out of loneliness? Harry looked at Meghan not as his wife, but as the woman who had dismantled his world. The promises she had made, loyalty, love, truth, shattered into dust. And his silence spoke louder than anything he could say. For hours, he said nothing, just stared, broken, until finally, he whispered words that cut deeper than any scream. "I can't do this anymore." Those 6 words were his goodbye. But leaving wasn't simple. Harry wasn't just walking away from a marriage. He was walking away from a child he had raised, loved, and claimed as his own. Archie wasn't just Meghan's son. He was his son too, not by blood, but by love. And love doesn't vanish when paper says otherwise. That's what broke Harry most. He wasn't just leaving Meghan. He was leaving Archie. Pause here. Put yourself in Harry's shoes. Could you walk away from a child who wasn't yours, knowing every bedtime story, every hug, every laugh was real, even if the DNA wasn't? Or would you stay, swallowing your pain, pretending nothing happened, just to keep hold of the child you love? That was Harry's torment. His heart screamed to stay for Archie. His pride screamed to leave. And pride won. According to palace insiders, Harry packed a bag quietly one night. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just quiet movements. The kind of silence that screams louder than anger. Meghan reportedly begged him not to go. She promised change, promised to make things right. But Harry knew there was no going back. Forgiveness might be possible for mistakes. But betrayal on this scale? It was a wound that would never heal. When he kissed Archie goodbye, he broke. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered promises no one else could hear. Promises that he would always love him. That none of this was his fault. That he would never stop being there for him, no matter what the headlines said. And then, with one last look, Harry walked out the door. That image, a prince leaving his home, not for duty, not for exile, but for heartbreak, is one that will haunt royal history forever. This wasn't abdication. This wasn't rebellion. This was devastation. A man saying goodbye not just to his wife and child, but to the dream he had built for himself outside the monarchy. And the world noticed. The first photos of Harry after his departure told the story better than words. His eyes hollow, his posture heavy. He wasn't the fiery, laughing Harry the public knew. He was broken. Social media exploded with sympathy and scorn. Poor Harry, some said. He gave up everything for her, and she destroyed him. Others were cruel. He should have known better. Once a spare, always a fool. The palace, of course, tried to frame his absence. They called it a private matter. They insisted Harry was simply taking time to reflect. But the truth was already out. Harry hadn't just left Meghan. He had said goodbye to the illusion of control, to the fairy tale he thought he was living. And here's the haunting irony. Harry, who once walked away from the monarchy to protect Meghan, was now walking away from Meghan to protect himself. The circle of his life had closed in the cruelest way. Now the question remained, was this goodbye final? Would Harry ever return to Meghan's side? Or was this the beginning of a permanent split? And what about Archie, the child caught in the middle of it all? The world didn't have answers. But one thing was certain. Harry's goodbye was just the beginning of another storm. Because while Harry struggled to rebuild himself, the monarchy faced a crisis it had never anticipated. Questions of succession, legitimacy, and survival. And as the crown scrambled to hold itself together, Meghan wasn't finished. Because she had one more move to play. One more revelation that would push this scandal from chaos into catastrophe.